Our next speaker is Sherwood Richards from Caltech. He's studying astrophysics under Christian Ott, and his practicum is at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. He will be speaking to us about insights into exotic core collapse supernovae.
Thank you. So I study the biggest explosions in the universe, if you don't count the Big Bang. And many of these explosions come from core collapse supernovae, which is the collapse of massive stars. Unfortunately, despite decades of work, the origin of these explosions, or really the mechanism that causes these stars to explode, isn't very well understood. There isn't a satisfying, complete answer. So I will briefly talk about what is known about core collapse supernovae, and some more exotic kinds of supernovae, and then talk about how we can use computation to understand them better. And this is, of course, work that I've done with my advisor, Christian Ott, who's in the audience, Philip Musta, who's now a postdoc in Berkeley, and many, many other people who have helped me, who have developed a lot of the code and who have done a lot of the work. So this is the most famous supernova, supernova 1987A. It's famous because it was the most recent nearby supernova. And so this picture is from 1987, where this star exploded, and it exploded with an energy of about 10 to the 35 times the sum of all nuclear tests that have ever happened on Earth. And from this explosion, we detected something like 20 neutrinos. So people are very excited about the next nearby supernova because we have much better neutrino detectors, so we'll detect lots more neutrinos. And also the world's first gravitational wave telescope has recently come online, so there's potential for very exciting observations. So now let's take a step into the twilight zone and talk about more exotic core collapse supernovae and other kinds of explosions. So a gamma ray burst is a bright flash an extremely bright flash of gamma rays that were discovered from satellites that were designed to monitor nuclear tests during the Cold War. This is supernova 1999 BW, which was the first supernova that was observed at the same time and place as a gamma ray burst. So fortunately, we don't understand where gamma ray bursts come from. It's one of the long outstanding mysteries in astronomy. But there seems to be some connection between certain kinds of supernovae and certain kinds of gamma ray bursts. So the long gamma ray bursts are associated with the type 1c broadline supernovae, which just means that there's no hydrogen or helium lines or silicon lines, and lines are broadened, which means very fast expansion velocity. Most hypernovae, which are supernova explosions that explode with something like 10 times the energy of ordinary supernovae, most of them are type 1c broadline. And of the 11 supernovae that have been observed at the same time and place as a gamma ray burst, they're all of this type 1c broadline. So at least part of the answer to the origin of these gamma ray bursts seems to be from core collapse supernovae. So I'll just give you a brief introduction to what a core collapse supernova is, at least how we understand it so far. So when a very massive star is burning through its fuel, it will fuse hydrogen into helium, into carbon and oxygen, into silicon, and eventually into iron, and it'll build up this very heavy iron core. When the iron core gets so massive that it can't support itself under its own gravity, it will collapse from a couple thousand kilometers to something like 30 kilometers. And so this collapse will happen in something like a tenth of a second. Once the entire core reaches densities larger than an atomic nucleus, the strong nuclear force will kick into effect, and the collapse will reverse and bounce back, sending a shock wave out through the star. Unfortunately, this shock wave isn't strong enough to blow up the star, so it needs help. And the canonical picture is that there's neutrinos that come from the inner regions and propagate through the outer regions under the shock and deposit energy into this so-called gain region. And by depositing this energy, it provides the energy to finish blowing up the rest of the star. Unfortunately, there's a lot of things that are unfortunate. So unfortunately, when we put this on computers, the best simulations with all of the relevant physics, we can't robustly blow up the stars. So there's something that's missing, whether it's computational or physical. Now, with regards to these high energy explosions, the twilight zone explosions that I mentioned before, this mechanism of neutrinos depositing energy into the shock, there's simply not enough energy there to explain these extremely high energy explosions. So the mechanism, one of the mechanisms that's theoretically imposed is this magnetorotational mechanism, where the star is initially rotating, and as it collapses, conservation of angular momentum causes the core to spin up very rapidly. And by doing so, it winds up magnetic fields, and these magnetic fields can couple to the fluid outside of the core, which can deposit enough energy to blow up the star with these extremely large energies. Also, when you wind up magnetic fields like this, the idea is that you might be able to get these large structures which will drive jets, which could produce these gamma ray bursts. So this model can potentially explain both. Through 50 years of effort, there's been a lot of progress, and I'm going to talk about some of the new insights into various aspects of this core collapse supernova simulation. So the things that go into these simulations, there's a long laundry list of physics. There's the progenitors, the stars that we start from as initial conditions, with some rotation, which these two things are not very well known because we can't see very deep into stars, especially the very massive stars. There's also nuclear physics, detailed nuclear physics that has to go into it because you have densities that are above the density of an atomic nucleus. To properly treat gravity, we need to impose Einstein's general relativity. And in some cases, despite the stigma in astronomy, we actually do have to deal with magnetic fields because in some circumstances, they can be amplified very quickly. And there's also, since the neutrinos are likely the cause of many of these explosions, it's very important to accurately account for the transport of the energy from the inside through the outside and depositing the energy. Computationally, this comes in the form of reality is three-dimensional, so we have to consider full three-dimensional hydrodynamics. Neutrino transport is seven-dimensional. There's the three spatial dimensions. There's two for direction, one for the energy of the neutrino, and along with time, that's six, or along with time, that's seven. And that is a very difficult thing computationally to simulate. And of course, the eternal problem with computation, when you have these very, very expensive simulations, it's difficult to show that there is enough resolution that the scales that you're resolving are really the most important scales of the problem. So to look at the first thing I'm going to talk about was an excursion to looking into magnetohydrodynamics and in particular in 3 dimensions, to look at the nature of these three-dimensional, these hyper-energetic explosions. So this was based on simulations that Philip Musta did back a couple of years ago, and we published on it. So these are 3-dimensional global, meaning simulating the entire relevant region, simulations of core collapse supernovae that are rotating quickly and magnetized. So the idea is you have this collapsing star and it winds up magnetic fields, and we wanted to see what, so in previous cases, this is from a 2-dimensional simulation. You see these giant jets. We wanted to see whether the same sort of thing happens in 3 dimensions. So this is a film that shows the results. On the left side is the 3-dimensional simulation. On the right side is essentially a 2-dimensional simulation. The colors here, the warm colors mean it's very magnetically dominated, and the cool colors means the gas pressure is dominating. If this will play. There we go. Okay, so right now the core bounced, and you can see, so it's rotating around this way. You can see they both start out very similarly, and there's these outflows along the poles of the simulation that start. However, very quickly, the outflows in the 3D case destabilize, and rather than form coherent jets, they start crumpling onto each other. So this will keep going. I'll fast forward a little bit. Actually, there's no slide, so I won't do that. So this will keep going. This is this is reminiscent of the 2D simulations that say that a jet that can explain GRBs can form. Unfortunately, it looks like this single mechanism, at least at this point in time, within a few 100 milliseconds, can't explain the whole explosion GRB jet mechanism. once you... Okay, so the problem here that we discovered is that this instability is a magnetohydrodynamic kink instability. So if you have a perturbation that looks like this one, it's a helical perturbation, it will grow exponentially and eventually disrupt the polar outflow. And this plot just shows this warm color means that this is theoretically where we expect the destabilization to happen, and it happens on about the time scale that we expect. So rather than have a big jet, you end up with these flux tubes that are crumpled up into lobes that are slowly expanding. So another excursion into the nature of these exotic supernovae that I'm currently working on is looking at gravitational waves from core collapse supernovae. So the idea is that we might be able to use gravitational waves, since they come from deep inside of the supernova, to learn about the nature of the supernova and the physics that are on those scales. So in order to do this, I ran almost 1,800 two-dimensional simulations in a large parameter sweep over different rotation profiles and different nuclear physics that go into it. So this is what a gravitational wave from a rotating core collapse supernova looks like. So on this side is time. On this axis is time, just milliseconds after bounce. So the bounce is at time equals 0. And on this axis is the amplitude of the gravitational wave. So as the star is collapsing, right at bounce, there's a huge spike. So these two spikes come from just the bounce of a squashed sphere. So because of the quadrupole moment and it's rapidly changing, that excites the gravitational waves. After bounce, there's these oscillations which happen at a pretty regular frequency, and this just comes from the alternating sloshing of the very dense core. So in the next plot, I will show you a figure with these two observables. So this characteristic oscillation frequency is what I'll call the peak frequency, and this amplitude of the bounce peak is this delta H plus. So this is a plot of all the simulations. Each dot on here is an individual simulation. Each color here is a different set of nuclear physics, and so there's many different rotation profiles that you see. So each of these colors, so this is a slowly rotating model, this is more quickly, and this is even more quickly rotating. So you see that, so this is the peak, the amplitude of the bounce signal, and this is the frequency of the post-bounce oscillations. So it's interesting to see in this area over here, it looks like there's a lot of mixing up. So if we observe a signal here, we won't be able to distinguish which set of nuclear physics goes into it. However, there is a region where a broad region where we would broadly expect to observe the signals. And if it's outside of that, that would indicate that there's a very large lack of understanding in what we're talking about. So this is essentially a mild prediction for what we'll see. However, if it's slowly rotating in this regime, there is some discerning ability where if we did observe a signal here, we'd know that it's very likely not one of these sets of nuclear physics down here. So the last thing that I'm working on, which I unfortunately won't be talking about today, is something that started from my practicum at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And it's, at this point, I want to thank the CSGF, because this is something that, like I said, came from my practicum, and I don't think I would be working on this without the experience provided to me by the practicum. So for the younger fellows out there, don't discount the practicum. It really is very valuable. So I'm also, I talked about this with a poster in previous years, and I'd be happy to talk about it after. But what I'm working on is developing a new technique to simulate the very difficult 7-dimensional transport problem. So I was at Berkeley, now I'm at Los Alamos for summer, and so yes, if you want some unfinished details about this, talk to me afterwards. But so that's these are my various excursions into core collapse supernovae, and hopefully within the next couple of decades, hopefully it won't take 50 more years, we will actually have some real understanding of how core collapse supernovae work. All right, thank you.